pretzel stand. That's where Ethan Truman's carefully rebuilt world began to crack apart. One second, he was holding his daughter Mattie's hand in the crowded Christmas Eve mall, promising her they'd see Santa after one more stop. The next second, she was pointing across the food court with those innocent 5-year-old eyes and saying words that turned his blood to ice. "Daddy, that lady looks like Mommy." Hey there, beautiful souls. Welcome back to Unbroken Truths, where we dive into stories that remind us love, forgiveness, and family can survive even the darkest storms. I'm so glad you're here with me today. Drop a comment below and tell me where you're watching from. I love connecting with you all. And if you haven't subscribed yet, please hit that button now, because what happens in this story will absolutely shatter you in the best way possible. Trust me, you don't want to miss where this journey takes us. Now, back to Ethan standing frozen in that mall. His heart slammed against his ribs. He followed Mattie's gaze, and there standing near the pretzel stand with one hand covering her mouth, tears streaming down her face, was Clarice, his ex-wife. The woman who walked out 3 years ago, claiming she needed to find herself. The woman who left him to explain to their 2-year-old daughter why Mommy wasn't coming home. The woman who hadn't called, hadn't written, hadn't sent so much as a birthday card. 3 years of bedtime stories without a mother's goodnight kiss. 3 years of Ethan learning to braid hair from YouTube videos and masking his own heartbreak behind forced smiles. 3 years of Mattie asking questions he couldn't answer. And now, she was here. Clarice looked thinner, her once vibrant presence now subdued, almost ghostly. But those same hazel eyes Mattie had inherited were locked onto their daughter with an intensity that made Ethan's protective instincts roar to life. "Daddy, she's crying," Mattie said, her small voice laced with concern that no 5-year-old should have to feel. Before Ethan could stop her, Mattie broke free from his grip and darted through the sea of holiday shoppers, her red winter hat bobbing like a beacon through the crowd. "Mattie!" Ethan's voice cracked as panic seized him. He pushed through the masses, his pulse hammering in his ears, desperately trying to keep his daughter in sight. And then Mattie did something that stopped his heart completely. She called out, "Mommy!" Clarice turned, her tear-stained face freezing in shock as recognition dawned. She dropped to her knees just as Mattie reached her, and for one suspended moment, the entire food court seemed to fade away, leaving only a mother and daughter separated by 3 years of abandonment, now inches apart. Ethan stood frozen several feet away, his chest heaving, a hurricane of emotions tearing through him. Anger, confusion, betrayal, and something else, something he absolutely refused to acknowledge, because acknowledging it meant he was still vulnerable to the woman who destroyed him. "Mattie," Clarice whispered, her voice breaking. "Oh my God, you've gotten so big." Ethan finally found his voice, and it came out sharper than he intended. "Mattie, come back here, now." Both Clarice and Mattie flinched. Clarice stood slowly, her trembling hands falling to her sides. "Ethan," she breathed. I didn't expect to see you here." "Clearly," he replied, ice-coating every syllable. "Come on, Mattie, we need to go see Santa." But Mattie didn't move, her small face scrunched with worry as she looked between her parents. "But Daddy, Mommy's sad. We can't leave her alone on Christmas." Ethan felt dozens of eyes on them, curious strangers watching their family drama unfold like some tragic holiday movie. His jaw clenched. This wasn't the place. Not here, not now, not ever. "Ethan, please," Clarice said quietly, her voice barely audible above the mall chaos. "Could we talk? Just for a minute?" Every logical nerve in Ethan's body screamed at him to grab Mattie and walk away, to protect his daughter from the woman who had already abandoned her once, to protect himself from reopening wounds that had barely begun to scar. But something in Clarice's eyes, a desperation, a brokenness he'd never seen before, made him hesitate. And in that hesitation, his daughter's small hand slipped into his, squeezing tight. "Please, Daddy," Mattie whispered. Ethan looked down at his little girl, the center of his entire universe, and knew he was about to make either the biggest mistake of his life or the bravest decision he'd ever faced. "5 minutes," he finally said, his voice tight. "There's a coffee shop around the corner." What Ethan doesn't know yet is that those 5 minutes will lead to a revelation that will turn everything he thought he knew upside down. And it all starts with a confession, that will leave you breathless. The coffee shop was mercifully quieter than the mall, though the tension radiating between Ethan and Clarice could have shattered every window in the place. Ethan ordered hot chocolate with extra whipped cream for Mattie the way she liked it, the way he'd learned to make it perfect over 3 years of solo parenting. He ordered black coffee for himself, bitter and strong. Clarice asked for tea, her voice so soft the barista had to lean in to hear her. They found a corner table away from prying eyes. Mattie immediately dove into her whipped cream mountain, temporarily distracted from the emotional powder keg sitting across from her. Ethan wrapped his hands around his mug, using the heat to ground himself. He couldn't look at Clarice directly. If he did, he might see something that would crack the armor he'd spent 3 years building. "So," he said finally, his voice flat, "what brings you back to town?" Clarice stared into her tea like it held answers she couldn't find anywhere else. "My mom's sick, cancer, stage 3. I came back to help take care of her." The words hit Ethan harder than he expected. Margaret Ripley had always been kind to him, even after the divorce, one of the few people who hadn't chosen sides. She'd loved Mattie fiercely, and her absence from their lives had been another casualty of Clarice's departure. "I'm sorry to hear that," Ethan said, and he meant it. "She's been asking about Mattie," Clarice continued, her gaze fixed downward. "About you, too." "We're fine," Ethan said curtly, the words coming out more defensive than he intended. "We've been fine without you." Clarice flinched as if he'd physically struck her. "I deserve that," she whispered. "I deserve all your anger, Ethan. What I did was unforgivable." Mattie looked up from her hot chocolate, her small face studying her mother with the kind of intensity only children possess the ability to see through walls adults build. Ethan leaned back in his chair, his fingers tightening around his mug. 3 years of questions that haunted him at 2 a.m. when sleep wouldn't come. 3 years of wondering what he'd done wrong, what he could have done differently. And now she was sitting right here, and he could finally ask, "Then why did you do it?" The question tore out of him, raw and jagged. "Why did you leave us?" Clarice's eyes filled with fresh tears. Her hands trembled as she set down her mug. "I was sick, Ethan. Not physically, mentally. I had postpartum depression that never went away. It just got worse and worse until I couldn't see any way out." Ethan stared at her, his mind racing backward through their last months together. He remembered how she'd withdrawn, how she'd stopped eating, how she'd cry for no reason he could understand. He'd thought she was unhappy with him, with their marriage, with the life they'd built. He'd never considered it might be something deeper, something beyond his control. "I thought," Clarice's voice broke, "I thought you and Mattie would be better off without me." "Why didn't you tell me?" Ethan asked, his voice softening despite himself. "Why didn't you let me help you?" "I was ashamed," Clarice admitted, tears spilling freely now. "I thought I was failing as a mother, as a wife. Everyone else made it look so easy being happy, being grateful, being enough, and I couldn't feel any of it. I was drowning, and I convinced myself that if I just disappeared, you'd both be happier." Mattie, who had been quietly listening while picking at her whipped cream, suddenly spoke up. Her voice was small but piercing. "Did you stop loving us, Mommy?" The question hung in the air like a blade. Clarice's face crumpled. She reached across the table instinctively, then stopped herself, unsure if she had the right to touch her own daughter. "No, baby," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "Never. Not for one single second. I thought about you every day. Every morning when I woke up, every night before I went to sleep. You were always in my heart." "Then why didn't you come back?" Mattie asked with the devastating logic only a child could wield. Clarice looked at Ethan, then back at Mattie. "Because I was scared," she said honestly. "Scared you wouldn't want me anymore. Scared I'd hurt you again. Scared I wasn't strong enough to be the mommy you deserved." Ethan watched his daughter process this information. Mattie's small brow furrowed, her face scrunching in concentration the way it did when she was working through a difficult puzzle. Then, with the simple wisdom that seemed to come from somewhere beyond her 5 years, Mattie said, "But you're here now." Those 4 words hit Ethan like a physical force. She was here now. After 3 years of silence, 3 years of abandonment, 3 years of Ethan holding his daughter while she cried for a mother who never called Clarice, was here. But was it too late? Could broken trust ever truly be repaired? Could a family shattered into pieces ever be made whole again? Ethan looked at Clarice, really looking at her for the first time since they'd sat down. Behind the tears and the guilt, he could see something else: exhaustion, determination, and a fragile, flickering hope that terrified him because it meant she wanted something from him: forgiveness. And he didn't know if he had any left to give. "Where are you staying?" Ethan heard himself ask. "At my mom's house," Clarice replied. "I've been there for about a week." A week. She'd been in town for a week and hadn't reached out. Part of Ethan felt vindicated by that. She didn't deserve easy access to their lives. Another part felt the sting of it. Even now, she was keeping her distance. "Tomorrow is Christmas," Ethan said quietly. "I know," Clarice said, looking down at her hands. I was at the mall buying a gift for my mom when I saw you both." Mattie suddenly perked up, her hot chocolate forgotten. "Daddy, can Mommy come to our house for Christmas? Please." The request slammed into Ethan like a freight train. 1,000 reasons to say no raced through his mind. She abandoned you. She doesn't deserve this. What if she leaves again? What if Mattie gets hurt? What if you get hurt? But then he remembered something his own father had told him years ago, back when the world made sense. "Christmas is for forgiveness, son. If you can't find it in your heart to forgive on Christmas, when can you?" The decision Ethan makes next will change everything. And what happens when Clarice walks through their door on Christmas Day will test every boundary he's built. If you're feeling this story, drop a comment and let me know your engagement means the world to me. Ethan stared at his daughter's hopeful face, then at Clarice's shocked one. Every instinct screamed at him to protect Mattie, to protect himself, to say no and walk away before this woman could tear their lives apart again. But Mattie's hand was in his, small and trusting, and those wide hazel eyes, Clarice's eyes, were looking at him like he held the key to something precious. "Dinner's at 6, Ethan said finally, the words feeling like they were being dragged from somewhere deep inside him. "Nothing fancy, just ham and potatoes." Clarice's eyes widened in disbelief. "Are you sure?" "No," Ethan admitted, his honesty cutting through the tension. "I'm not sure at all. But it's Christmas and Mattie wants you there." "And you?" Clarice asked softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "What do you want, Ethan?" Ethan looked at her for the first time since their world had imploded 3 years ago. Behind the sadness and the guilt, he could still see traces of the woman he'd fallen in love with, the woman who'd given him the greatest gift of his life, their daughter. "I want Mattie to have a good Christmas," he said carefully. It wasn't the whole truth, but it was all he could offer right now, all he could admit without unraveling completely. Clarice nodded, understanding the boundaries he was drawing. "Thank you. I'll bring dessert." As they stood to leave, Mattie surprised them both by reaching for Clarice's hand. The gesture was so simple, so natural, as if 3 years hadn't passed at all. "I missed you, Mommy," Mattie said, her voice carrying a weight no 5-year-old should have to bear. Clarice knelt down, tears flowing freely now. She touched Mattie's face with trembling fingers, as if confirming she was real. "I missed you too, baby. More than you'll ever know, more than all the stars in the sky." Ethan watched this exchange with a knot forming in his throat. He'd spent 3 years trying to fill the void Clarice had left in Mattie's life, reading twice as many bedtime stories, attending every school event, learning to do hair and paint nails, and having tea parties with stuffed animals. But some spaces could only be filled by a mother's love, and seeing them together now made him realize just how much Mattie had been missing. It also terrified him, because what happened when Clarice left again? They walked out of the coffee shop into the cold December air. Snow had begun to fall, soft flakes catching in Mattie's hair, making her giggle. For a moment, they looked like a normal family: mother, father, daughter, enjoying the Christmas Eve magic. But nothing about this was normal. "I should let you go," Clarice said, reluctantly releasing Mattie's hand. "I'm sure you have things to do before tomorrow." 6 o'clock, Ethan repeated, his tone making it clear this was a fragile agreement, not a reconciliation. "I'll be there," Clarice promised. She knelt down one more time, eye level with Mattie. "Be good for your daddy, okay? And don't stay up too late waiting for Santa." "Okay, Mommy," Mattie beamed. Then she threw her arms around Clarice's neck in a fierce hug that made Clarice's entire body shake with silent sobs. Ethan had to look away. The pain on Clarice's face was too raw, too familiar. He'd worn that same expression for months after she left. When they finally separated, Clarice stood and met Ethan's eyes. "Thank you," she said again, "for giving me this chance. I know I don't deserve it." "You're right," Ethan said quietly. "You don't, but Mattie does. She deserves to know her mother." The truth of it hung between them like a challenge. As Clarice walked away, disappearing into the snowy evening, Mattie tugged on Ethan's coat. "Daddy? Yeah, Princess? Are you mad at Mommy?" Ethan crouched down, meeting his daughter's questioning gaze. He could lie. He could tell her everything was fine. But Mattie was smarter than that, and she deserved honesty. "I'm not mad," he said carefully. "I'm just confused. And I'm a little scared." "Scared of what?" "Scared that you might get hurt again." Mattie tilted her head, considering this. Then she wrapped her small arms around his neck. "It's okay to be scared, Daddy, but Mommy came back. That means something, right?" Out of the mouths of babes. Ethan held his daughter close, breathing in the scent of her strawberry shampoo, and wondered how a 5-year-old could be wiser than he was. "Yeah, sweetheart," he whispered. "That means something." But what it meant, whether it meant hope or heartbreak, he had no idea. That night, after Mattie was finally asleep, Ethan stood in his kitchen staring at the calendar on the refrigerator. Tomorrow's date was circled in red, Christmas Day. Below it, in Mattie's careful handwriting, was a wish she'd written weeks ago. "I want Mommy to come home." His chest tightened. He'd thought that wish was impossible. A fantasy from a little girl who didn't understand that some broken things couldn't be fixed. But now Clarice was coming to dinner, and that impossible wish suddenly felt dangerously close to reality. Ethan pulled out his phone and stared at the screen for a long moment before typing a message to his older brother, Tyler. "She's back. Clarice is back, and I invited her to Christmas dinner. Am I insane?" The response came within seconds. "Probably. But you're also a good father. Whatever you decide, Mattie comes first. And brother, guard your heart. You barely survived the first time." Ethan set the phone down and leaned against the counter, exhaustion washing over him. Guard your heart. Good advice. Impossible to follow. Because the moment he'd seen Clarice crying in that mall, the moment Mattie had called out Mommy with such joy, something inside him had cracked open. Something he'd locked away 3 years ago and sworn never to touch again. Hope. And hope, Ethan knew from bitter experience, was the most dangerous thing of all. He walked to the living room and looked at the Christmas tree, the one he and Mattie had decorated together, covering every inch with mismatched ornaments and too much tinsel. On the fireplace mantel hung 3 stockings, one with his name, one with Mattie's name, and one with Clarice's name embroidered in fading thread. He'd never had the heart to take it down. Every year, Mattie would ask why Mommy's stocking was still there. And every year, Ethan would say the same thing, because she's still part of our family, even if she's not here. Now she is here. And tomorrow, Christmas Day, would either be the beginning of healing or the opening of wounds that might never close. Ethan pulled out his phone again and sent one more message, this time to Clarice. He'd gotten her number from the brief moment they'd exchanged phones at the coffee shop for emergencies. "Mattie's excited about tomorrow. Please don't let her down." 3 dots appeared, then disappeared. Then it appeared again. Finally, a response came through. "I won't. I promise, Ethan. I won't run this time." Ethan stared at those words for a long time. "I won't run this time." Which meant she knew she'd run before. She knew what she'd done. She knew the devastation she'd left in her wake. The question was, could he believe her? Could he trust that this time would be different? Tomorrow would tell. And whatever happened, there was no going back from this moment. The door he'd just opened couldn't be closed again. For better or worse, Clarice Ripley was back in their lives. And Ethan Truman had absolutely no idea if he was ready for what came next. What happens when Clarice walks through that door on Christmas Day will test everything Ethan thought he knew about forgiveness, family, and second chances. The revelation that's coming will leave you stunned. If this story is hitting you in the feels, let me know in the comments. I love hearing from you. Christmas morning arrived with fresh snow and Mattie's squeals of delight as she discovered Santa had come. Ethan forced himself to focus on his daughter's joy, pushing thoughts of the evening ahead to the back of his mind. But as the day progressed, those thoughts crept forward like shadows. By noon, he was checking the clock every 15 minutes. By 3 o'clock, his hands were shaking as he prepared the ham. By 5:30, Mattie had changed her outfit 3 times and was stationed by the front window, her face pressed against the glass. "What if she doesn't come?" Mattie asked quietly. Ethan's heart clenched. "She'll come, sweetheart." But even as he said it, doubt gnawed at him. Clarice had made promises before. She stood at an altar and vowed, for better or worse. And then she'd walked away. At 5:47 p.m., headlights swept across the driveway. Mattie gasped. "She's here! Daddy, she's here!" Ethan wiped his hands on a towel, his pulse thundering in his ears. This was it, the moment that would determine everything. The doorbell rang. Mattie raced to the door and Ethan followed, his legs heavy. When he opened it, Clarice stood on the porch, snowflakes dusting her dark hair. She held a bakery box and a small gift bag, her eyes red-rimmed but hopeful. "Merry Christmas," she said softly. And despite everything, despite the anger and the hurt and the 3 years of silence, Ethan felt something shift inside his chest. Something terrifying. Something that felt dangerously like forgiveness beginning to take root. "Merry Christmas," he replied. "Come in. The evening ahead will test every wall Ethan has built. And what Clarice reveals over dinner will change everything he thought he knew about why she left." Clarice stepped into the house slowly, her eyes sweeping over the familiar surroundings like a ghost revisiting her former life. The Christmas tree stood in the same corner. The furniture hadn't changed. Even the family photos on the mantel remained, though Ethan noticed her gaze linger on one particular frame before quickly looking away. It was their wedding photo. He'd kept it there for Mattie's sake. At least, that's what he told himself. "Mommy, look what Santa brought me." Mattie grabbed Clarice's hand, pulling her toward the tree where a new dollhouse sat and assembled a project that had taken Ethan until 2 a.m. to complete. Clarice knelt beside their daughter, listening intently as Mattie chattered about each tiny piece of furniture, each miniature resident of the dollhouse. And for a moment, watching them together, Ethan could almost pretend the past 3 years hadn't happened. "Almost dinner's ready," he announced, his voice pulling them back to reality. They gathered around the same table where they'd shared thousands of meals as a family. Ethan had set 3 places, and seeing Clarice sit in her old chair sent a jolt through him. It felt both natural and completely wrong. At first, conversation was stilted, polite, careful. But Mattie, oblivious to the tension, filled the silence with stories about school, her best friend Sophie, and her ballet recital. Gradually, the atmosphere warmed. Clarice laughed at Mattie's animated storytelling, and Ethan found himself relaxing incrementally, the rigid set of his shoulders easing. "You're an amazing father," Clarice said quietly when Mattie excused herself to use the bathroom. "The way she talks, the confidence she has. That's all you, Ethan." "I did what I had to do," he replied, not quite meeting her eyes. "No," Clarice insisted. "You did more than that. You gave her stability, love. You never spoke badly about me, even though you had every right to." "She's 5 years old, Clarice. She didn't need to hear about adult problems." "Still," Clarice's voice cracked, "thank you." After dinner, they moved to the living room. Clarice handed Mattie the gift she'd brought, a beautiful music box with a ballerina that spun to a gentle melody. Mattie's face lit up with pure joy. "I love it, Mommy." Then Clarice turned to Ethan, hesitantly offering him the small gift bag. "I have something for you, too." Inside was a framed photograph he'd never seen before. It showed him in the hospital, holding newborn Mattie, his face a mixture of awe and overwhelming love as he gazed at his daughter for the first time. "My mom took it," Clarice explained softly. "I found it going through her things. I thought you should have it." Ethan stared at the photo, emotion closing his throat. "Thank you," he managed. As the evening wore on and Mattie's yawns grew more frequent, Clarice offered to tuck her in. Ethan hesitated, then nodded. He stood in the hallway, listening to Clarice read The Night Before Christmas with all the voices and animation Mattie loved. When the story ended, he heard his daughter ask the question he'd been dreading. "Will you be here tomorrow, Mommy?" A pause. Then Clarice's voice, thick with emotion. I don't know, sweetheart. That's something your daddy and I need to talk about. I want you to stay, Mattie said sleepily. Forever. Ethan closed his eyes, leaning against the wall. Forever. Such a simple word. Such an impossible promise. When Clarice emerged from Mattie's room, her eyes were red-rimmed. She's asleep, she whispered. They stood in awkward silence before Ethan gestured toward the living room. Coffee? Or something stronger? Coffee's fine. As he prepared the pot, Clarice wandered around, stopping at the mantel where family photos were displayed. Her fingers traced the edge of one frame of the wedding photo. You kept it, she said, her voice barely audible. Mattie asked about it once. I told her it was important to remember where we came from. Clarice turned, tears streaming down her face. Ethan, there's something I need to tell you, something I should have told you 3 years ago. His stomach dropped. What is it? She took a shaky breath. The day I left, it wasn't just about the depression that was real. God knows it was real, but there was something else. Ethan's hands stilled on the coffee pot. What are you talking about? I had a diary. I wrote in it every day, trying to process what I was feeling, trying to understand why I couldn't connect to my own life, my own family. She paused, wiping her eyes. The day I left, I wrote something that I've never told anyone. I was planning to kill myself, Ethan. The words hit him like a physical blow. The coffee pot nearly slipped from his hands. What? He breathed. I had pills. I had a plan. I was going to wait until you took Mattie to your mother's house, and then... Her voice broke completely. I thought if I was gone, you'd both be free. Free from the burden of me. Free to be happy. Ethan sank onto the couch, his legs unable to hold him. Jesus, Clarice. But I couldn't do it, she continued, her words tumbling out in a rush now. I sat there with those pills in my hand, and I kept thinking about Mattie, about how she'd grown up knowing her mother chose to leave her that way. I couldn't do that to her. So you left instead, Ethan said numbly. I left because I was terrified of what I might do if I stayed. I checked myself into a facility 3 states away. I spent 6 months in intensive therapy. I was hospitalized twice, and the whole time I wanted to call you, to explain, but I was so ashamed. I thought you'd be better off thinking I just didn't love you any more than knowing the truth. Ethan stared at her, his entire understanding of the past 3 years crumbling. You were suicidal, and you didn't tell me? I could have helped you. We could have gotten your help together. I know that now, Clarice sobbed. But back then, I wasn't thinking clearly. The depression, it lies to you, Ethan. It tells you everyone would be better off without you. It makes you believe things that aren't true. Ethan ran his hands through his hair, trying to process this revelation. Anger, sympathy, confusion, and grief warred inside him. Why are you telling me this now? He asked. Because you deserve the truth. Because Mattie deserves a mother who's honest about her struggles. And because... She met his eyes. Because I'm terrified of falling back into that darkness, and I need you to know what warning signs to look for. If I'm going to be in Mattie's life in your life, you need to know what you're dealing with. The vulnerability in her voice, the raw honesty of her confession, broke something open inside Ethan. This wasn't the woman who had left him. This was someone who had been to hell and clawed her way back. Are you okay now? He asked carefully. I'm better, she said. I'm on medication. I see a therapist twice a week. I have a safety plan. But depression doesn't just disappear, Ethan. It's something I'll manage for the rest of my life. He absorbed this slowly. And if you have another episode, then I'll tell you. I'll ask for help. I won't run again. She looked at him with desperate intensity. I swear to you, Ethan, I won't run again. The room fell silent except for the ticking of the clock on the wall. Ethan thought about the past 3 years, the loneliness, the anger, the nights he'd cried in the shower so Mattie wouldn't hear. He'd built his entire narrative around the idea that Clarice had simply stopped loving them. But the truth was so much more complicated, so much more devastating, and somehow so much easier to forgive. I don't know what to say, he finally admitted. You don't have to say anything, Clarice replied. I just needed you to know. Whatever happens next, whether you let me be part of your lives or tell me to stay away, you deserve to know the whole truth. Ethan looked at this broken, brave woman sitting before him. the mother of his child, the person he once vowed to love in sickness and in health. He meant those vows when he said them, and maybe it wasn't too late to honor them. Everything has changed. The truth Clarice just revealed has shattered every assumption Ethan held for 3 years. But can truth alone heal wounds this deep? What comes next will test both of them in ways they never imagined. Drop a comment if this revelation hit you as hard as it hit me. Let's process this together. They talked until nearly 2 a.m., filling in the gaps of 3 lost years with painful honesty. Clarice told him about the psychiatric facility, the months of therapy, the slow, agonizing process of learning to want to live again. Ethan told her about the nights he'd collapsed after Mattie fell asleep, about the parent-teacher conferences he attended alone, about the way Mattie would sometimes cry for her mother and he'd have no comfort to offer. By the time Clarice left, promising to return the next day, Ethan felt emotionally gutted, exhausted, but also strangely lighter, as if a weight he'd been carrying had finally been shared. The next few weeks fell into a careful rhythm. Clarice came over 3 times a week, always with Ethan present, always respecting the boundaries he set. She attended Mattie's ballet practice. She helped with homework. She learned the bedtime routine Ethan had established. And slowly, impossibly, they began to feel like a family again. But Ethan kept his guard up. He had to. Because letting Clarice back into their lives meant making himself vulnerable again, and he wasn't sure he could survive another abandonment. Then came the call that shattered their fragile peace. It was a Tuesday afternoon. Ethan was at work when his phone rang, Clarice's number flashing on the screen. "Hello?" "Ethan." Her voice was strange, distant, flat in a way that made his blood run cold. "I need to tell you something." "What's wrong?" "My mom died this morning." The words hung in the air like smoke. "Oh God, Clarice, I'm so sorry. Are you okay? Where are you?" "I'm at the hospital. They just took her body away." Her voice was completely devoid of emotion, and that scared him more than tears would have. "I'm coming. Stay there. Don't move." "No," she said flatly. "Don't come. I don't want you to see me like this." "Like what?" "Empty." The words sent ice through his veins. He remembered what she'd told him on Christmas about the depression, about the suicidal thoughts, about the lies her mind told her when she was at her lowest. "Clarice, listen to me. I'm coming to get you right now. You're not alone in this." "I should be alone," she said, her voice hollow. "Everyone I love ends up suffering. My mom suffered. You suffered. Mattie suffered. Maybe I'm the problem, Ethan. Maybe I'm the poison." "That's not true. I have to go." "Clarice, wait." The line went dead. Ethan's hands shook as he grabbed his keys and ran for the parking lot, his mind racing with terror. He called her back. No answer. He called again. Voicemail, "Please, God. Please don't let her do something stupid." He drove to the hospital first, and she wasn't there. Her mother's house next. Her car was in the driveway, but she didn't answer the door. He called her therapist's emergency line, her best friend from high school, anyone who might know where she'd go. Nothing. By the time he picked Mattie up from his mother's house, panic had fully set in. "Where's Mommy?" Mattie asked immediately. "She was supposed to come to my class today." Ethan's heart cracked. "She had to take care of something, sweetheart. Her mom, your grandmother Margaret, passed away today." Mattie's face fell. "Is Mommy sad?" "Very sad, baby. We should go find her. She shouldn't be alone when she's sad." Ethan spent the evening calling every number he had, driving past every place he could think of. The park where they used to walk, the coffee shop where they'd reconnected, the overlook where he'd proposed. Nothing. As midnight approached, his phone finally rang. "Clarice, it's me." Her voice was small, broken. "I'm sorry I scared you." "Where are you?" "Somewhere safe. I called my therapist. I'm okay, Ethan. I'm not going to do anything." Relief flooded through him so intensely his knees nearly buckled. "Where are you?" "Let me come get you." "No, I need some time alone. I need to process this without dragging you and Mattie down with me." "You're not dragging us anywhere." "Yes, I am." Her voice cracked. "Don't you see? This is what I do. I fall apart, and everyone around me has to pick up the pieces. My mom spent the last months of her life worrying about me instead of focusing on herself. You spent 3 years cleaning up the mess I made. And Mattie deserves so much better than a mother who can't keep herself together. Clarice, you're grieving. You just lost your mother." I can't do this, Ethan. I thought I could. I thought I was strong enough to be the mother Mattie needs, the person you might learn to trust again. But I'm not. I'm broken, and I'm always going to be broken, and I can't keep pretending otherwise. So what are you saying? Ethan's voice was barely a whisper. I'm saying maybe it was a mistake to come back. Maybe you and Mattie really are better off without me. Don't you dare, Ethan said, anger flaring through his fear. Don't you dare make that decision for us. Mattie loves you. She's been happier these past few weeks than I've seen her in 3 years. And what happens when I fall apart again? What happens when the depression comes back and I can't get out of bed? What happens when she needs me and I'm too broken to be there? Then we deal with it together, Ethan shouted. That's what families do, Clarice. They don't run when things get hard. They stay. They fight. They hold each other up. I don't know if I can be that person. Yes, you can. You already are. You stayed this time. When your mom died and the darkness came back, you called your therapist instead of running. You called me. That's not a weakness, Clarice. That's strength. Silence on the other end of the line. Mattie needs you, Ethan said, his voice raw. And so do I. The words were out before he could stop them. The truth he'd been avoiding for weeks, maybe longer. He needed her. Despite everything, despite the pain and the fear and the 3 years of rebuilding his life without her, he needed her. Ethan, her voice broke completely. Come home, he said softly. Please, just come home. More silence. Then finally, I don't know where home is anymore. And with that, she hung up. Ethan stood in his kitchen, phone clutched in his hand, and felt the foundations of his carefully rebuilt world crumbling beneath him. He'd opened the door, he'd let her back in. He'd started to hope, to believe that maybe they could find their way back to each other. And now she is gone again. Only this time, it hurt even more. Because this time, he'd admitted to himself what he'd been denying all along. He was falling in love with her again, and there wasn't a damn thing he could do to stop it. Everything is falling apart. Clarice is spiraling, Ethan is breaking, and Mattie is caught in the middle. But what happens next is the moment that will change everything, starting with 2 words from a little girl who understands more than any adult gives her credit for. You need to see where this goes. If you're on the edge of your seat, leave a comment and let me know. 3 days passed with no word from Clarice. 3 days of Ethan checking his phone every 5 minutes, of lying to Mattie that mommy just needed some time alone, of barely sleeping because every creak in the house made him bolt upright, hoping it was her. On the 4th morning, Mattie climbed into his bed at dawn, her small face serious. Daddy, I had a dream about mommy. Ethan pulled her close, his heart aching. Yeah? What happened in the dream? She was lost in the snow, and she was calling for us, but she couldn't find her way home, so I turned on all the Christmas lights so she could see where we were. The simple wisdom of it hit Ethan like a lightning bolt. So she could see where we were. Clarice wasn't running from them. She was lost, and maybe she needed them to show her the way back. Mattie, he said slowly, an idea forming. How would you feel about making something for mommy? Something to show her we want her to come home? Mattie's face lit up. Like what? I have an idea. They spent the morning creating a video on Ethan's phone. Mattie sat in front of the Christmas tree still up because she begged him not to take it down yet, and spoke directly to the camera with the unfiltered honesty only a child could muster. Hi, Mommy. It's me, Mattie. Daddy says you're very sad because Grandma Margaret went to heaven. I'm sad too. But Daddy taught me that when you're sad, you're supposed to be with people who love you. And we love you. Mommy, me and Daddy both love you so, so much. Please come home. We miss you. Then she held up a drawing and made 3 stick figures holding hands under a rainbow. This is us, she explained. We're a family, and families stay together. Ethan's throat tightened as he watched his daughter pour her heart out. When she finished, she looked at him. Your turn, Daddy. My turn? You have to tell Mommy you want her home too. Ethan hesitated, but Mattie was right. If he wanted Clarice to believe she was wanted, he had to say it out loud. He turned the camera on himself, and the words came easier than he expected. Clarice, I know you're scared. I know you think you're protecting us by staying away, but you're wrong. Mattie needs her mother. Not a perfect mother, just her mother. The real you. with all your struggles and your strength, and I. He paused, then pushed forward. I need you too. I spent 3 years trying to convince myself I didn't, but I do. We're better together than apart. So please, come home. Let us help you carry this. You don't have to do it alone. He sent the video to Clarice, then waited. Hours passed, no response. But at 4:17 p.m., his phone finally buzzed. A text from Clarice. Can I come over? Ethan's hands shook as he typed back. The door's always open. When the doorbell rang 30 minutes later, Mattie sprinted to answer it before Ethan could even stand up. Clarice stood on the porch, looking fragile and exhausted. Her eyes were swollen from crying, her hair pulled back in a messy ponytail. She held a small overnight bag in one hand. Mommy! Mattie threw her arms around Clarice's waist. Clarice dropped the bag and sank to her knees, pulling Mattie into a fierce embrace. I'm sorry, baby. I'm so sorry I scared you. It's okay, Mattie said, her voice muffled against Clarice's shoulder. You're here now. That's what matters. You're here now. The same words Mattie had spoken that first day in the coffee shop. The words that had started all of this. Ethan approached slowly, giving Clarice space but making sure she knew he was there. I watched the video, Clarice said, looking up at him with tear-filled eyes. About 50 times. And, Ethan asked softly, and you're right, both of you. I can't keep running every time things get hard. My therapist said the same thing. She reminded me that grief doesn't mean I'm broken, it means I loved someone deeply. And that loving people, even when it hurts, is what makes us human. She stood slowly, still holding Mattie's hand. My mom died, and I fell apart. But instead of reaching out, I retreated. I convinced myself I was toxic, that I'd ruin your lives if I stayed. But that's the depression talking, not the truth. The truth, Ethan said, closing the distance between them, is that you're the strongest person I know. You survived something that could have destroyed you. You got help. You came back. And now you're standing here, choosing to stay even when every instinct tells you to run. That's not a weakness, Clarice. That's courage. Fresh tears spilled down her cheeks. I don't feel courageous. You don't have to feel it for it to be true. They stood there, the three of them, in the doorway of the home they'd once shared. The winter evening was dark around them, but inside, the lights were warm and welcoming. I spoke to my therapist about next steps, Clarice said quietly. She suggested I increase my sessions to 3 times a week for a while, and she wants me to be transparent with you about my mental state, not to burden you, but so you can help me recognize warning signs if the depression gets bad again. I can do that, Ethan said without hesitation. She also said, Clarice paused, glancing at Mattie. She said I shouldn't rush into anything, that rebuilding trust takes time, and I need to focus on my relationship with Mattie first before we even think about us. The word hung in the air, heavy with possibility. One step at a time, Ethan agreed, even though part of him wanted to pull her into his arms and never let go. But Clarice's therapist was right. They needed to rebuild the foundation before they could reconstruct the house. Can you stay for dinner? Mattie asked, hopefully. Clarice looked at Ethan, who nodded. Please, stay. I'd like that, Clarice said, smiling through her tears. As they moved inside, something fundamental shifted. The air felt lighter. The weight that had been pressing on Ethan's chest for days, for years, began to lift. This wasn't a fairy tale ending. There would still be hard days ahead. Grief to process, trust to rebuild, boundaries to navigate. But for the first time since that Christmas Eve reunion, Ethan felt something he hadn't dared to feel before: hope. Not the dangerous, reckless hope that ignored reality, but the steady, grounded hope that came from seeing someone face their demons and choose to fight. Clarice wasn't running, and neither was he. They were staying, together. And that was everything. The turning point has arrived. Clarice is back, not because everything is fixed, but because she's choosing to stay and fight. But the real test is still ahead. Can they truly rebuild what was broken? And what happens when Mattie speaks 2 words that will seal their fate forever? If this moment gave you chills, drop a comment. I need to know you're feeling this journey with me. 3 months later, spring had begun to thaw the winter snow. Clarice had moved into a small apartment 10 minutes away, close enough to be present, far enough to maintain healthy boundaries. She came to dinner twice a week, attended every one of Mattie's ballet recitals, and never missed a scheduled visit. Slowly, trust began to rebuild. Ethan watched as Clarice kept every promise she made. When she had a bad day, she called him and told him honestly, "I'm struggling today, but I'm okay. I just wanted you to know." When Mattie asked if Mommy was coming back to live with them, Clarice answered with careful honesty, "Not yet, baby, but I'm working on being the best mommy I can be." Then came the day that changed everything. It was Mattie's 6th birthday. They'd planned a small party at the park with just family and a few friends. Ethan had picked up the cake, Clarice had brought decorations, and together they'd transformed a picnic area into a princess wonderland. As Mattie ran around with her friends, Ethan and Clarice stood side by side, watching their daughter's joy. "She's so happy," Clarice said softly. "She is," Ethan agreed. "Because she has both her parents." Clarice turned to him, her eyes searching his face. "Ethan, can I ask you something?" "Anything. Do you think there's a chance for us? Not now, but someday?" Before Ethan could answer, Mattie ran up to them, breathless and grinning. She looked at her parents standing together, then grabbed both their hands. "Come on, we're taking a family picture." As they posed together, Ethan, Clarice, and Mattie between them, the photographer counted down. 3, 2, 1. And in that moment, just before the camera flashed, Mattie looked up at her parents and said 2 words that stopped time. "We're family." The same words she'd spoken on Christmas Eve. The words that had started their journey back to each other. Ethan met Clarice's eyes over their daughter's head, and in that look, past everything they survived, everything they lost, and everything they were choosing to rebuild. "Yes," he said softly, answering both Mattie and Clarice's earlier question. "We are, and we always will be." The pieces are falling into place, but there's still one more that will seal this family's future forever. 6 months after Mattie's birthday, on another Christmas Eve, Ethan found himself standing in the same mall where everything had changed a year ago. But this time, he wasn't alone. Clarice walked beside him, their fingers intertwined. Mattie skipped ahead, her red winter hat bobbing as she pointed excitedly at decorations. "It's been a year," Clarice said softly, stopping near the pretzel stand where they first locked eyes. "A year," Ethan echoed, pulling her closer. The journey hadn't been easy. There had been therapy sessions, difficult conversations, and moments of doubt. But through it all, they chose each other, day by day, step by step. Last month, Clarice had moved back home, not because everything was perfect, but because they'd learned that love wasn't about perfection, it was about showing up, even on the hard days. It was about choosing hope over fear. It was about building something stronger from broken pieces. "Daddy! Mommy! Look!" Mattie called, pointing at Santa's workshop. "Can we see Santa together? As a family?" Ethan looked at Clarice, who smiled through happy tears. "Yeah, Princess," he called back. "As a family." As they walked toward Santa's workshop, the 3 of them, hand in hand, Ethan realized something profound. They weren't the same family they'd been 3 years ago. They were better, stronger, more honest, more real, because they walked through fire and chose to come out the other side together. That night, after Mattie was asleep, Ethan and Clarice sat on the couch, her head resting on his shoulder. "Thank you," she whispered. "For what?" "For not giving up on me, for letting me find my way back." Ethan kissed the top of her head. "Thank you for coming back, for fighting, for staying." Outside, snow began to fall softly, blanketing the world in fresh white. Inside, their Christmas tree glowed with warmth and promise. And on the mantel, 3 stockings hung side by side, a family restored, not by forgetting the past, but by choosing to build a future worth fighting for. We're family. 2 simple words that had changed everything, and this time, they meant forever. If this story touched your heart, reminded you that broken things can be healed, and that families can survive even the darkest storms, please hit that like button and subscribe to Unbroken Truths. Share this story with someone who needs to hear that second chances are possible, that mental health struggles don't define us, and that love, real, honest, imperfect, is always worth fighting for. Thank you for taking this journey with me. Drop a comment and tell me what moment hit you hardest. I read every single one, and your stories inspire me to keep creating content that matters. Until next time, remember, some of the most beautiful stories begin with the courage to try again. Stay blessed, stay hopeful, and keep believing in unbroken truths.